Hello and welcome back to a YouTube video. Today I'm doing 25.22 mid-lane tier list server content. Like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. Most notably, we saw a buff towards Asol, a buff towards Yone, a nerf towards Akshan, and a nerf towards LeBlanc. These changes, none of them were massive in scope. In fact, the biggest move is probably Asol. He actually received a decent amount of power through just 5 flat movement speed and some more burst damage on his Q. It's pretty big for the champion. Being just more mobile around the map really helps him, and it allows him to just avoid skill shots. He's quite a big character model, and having that additional freedom does give him some more room to just like dodge things. In the case of LeBlanc, it is late game durability down. This is mostly to do with the fact that she's just performing relatively well for average brackets now, which is a long-term goal which we're trying to succeed in, and now that it's succeeding, we're just like pulling some of that back. So yeah, stat growth going down, it will impact her more in like average brackets where the average game goes longer. In the case of Akshan, it was 20 flat HP and 1 second off the QCD early. He already wasn't the best performing champion for average brackets. He is a very innately elite skewed OTP dependent kind of like pick, mostly built around the like wave clear into like roam and burst play style. This kind of nerf does impact him, but not hugely for that kind of bracket. In average brackets, he's still going to be just like a fine pick which you can opt into, but if you really want to master him, you do have to sink a decent amount of time into him. In the case of Yone, they just wanted to buff him up a bit. The buffs in the previous patch weren't really enough, so they've swung a bit harder. They've given him 5 flat damage on Q, which has brought him back to a more reasonable point. But yeah, the buff was nice. It did a bit to kind of like bring him back up as like an option. So let's get into it. The D tier is going to consist of the same 5 champions. That is for like sort of Varus, Corki, Tristana, all the champions which once upon a time were more viable in the mid lane, but Riot have had to nerf them because of their either competitive strength or general just like unhealthiness for the game. This is like the AP heavy Varus build which could like one-shot tanks. It just wasn't very interactive, so Riot ended up nerfing it quite heavily. Smolder, we obviously saw him get brought out at Worlds, and the champion, I think, in the right spots as like a conditional counter pick isn't bad. In fact, I think it can be quite good. Generally, the issue with Smolder mid-vote is he's very resource hungry, and unless you're playing him in like those very specific matchups, I think the champion really does suffer quite a bit. So I don't like rate him that highly. He could be, I think he could honestly be like a C tier pick if you do like conditionally pick him, like as like a more promotable option. But right now, like if you play him broadly, he just ends up not being a very good pick. I mean, Azir obviously very heavily pro jailed as a champion. He never really performs that well in solo queue, and yeah, this is a very kind of he was slightly better in previous patches before they nerfed him, and even with the nerfs, he was still seeing like very high competitive presence and prio, mostly through like bans. Like people were just like banning it away from the players who play it. And yeah, the champion for solo queue just not in the greatest states at the moment. Whether Riot end up doing something to kind of shift his power around, only time will tell. But yeah, right now, a pick which I kind of recommend avoiding. The C tier then, I have moved 2 champions out of here, and the 4 which remain are Gangplank. Not because I think he's like bad by any means, but because he has a very steep mastery curve. You'll only see it be played by OTPs, and that's for a very good reason. The champion requires a lot of understanding of how to utilize the barrels effectively, how to really like pressure people out of lane, and if you're not comfortable with that, then the champion just ends up being a lot worse than other options around him. Like, I think he really rewards time investment, and yeah, if you don't put the time investment into him, the other AD options on the list are just better than him. Twisted Fate, I really dislike as a champion. I think he's in a pretty bad state at the moment. He became way too overhyped during like the MSI era, and then he kind of got over nerfed because of it, and then they nerfed a bunch of the items and like things which kind of made him strong, and generally now he just sits as like this not really good option. Like he just isn't as, I mean, this is going to be like pretty similar with the other 2 champions in the C tier. Is like champions with non-damage ultimates traditionally end up being innately elite skewed, and then competitively jailed at like certain points, and then because they are competitively jailed, they end up being nerfed because of it, and then they end up being slightly like weaker than the broad range of other options. That being said though, if you understand how to utilize their ultimates and what value they really bring to a team, they can be good options. In fact, I really like recommending Ryze and Talia as champions, but you do have to like really put the time into them and just really understand why you're playing the champion. Like the macro is really important when playing these kind of picks, and if that's not your strength as a player, then you should probably play something else as it will become and then like develop those skills over time. So the B tier then, I've bumped Jace and Yone up. In the case of Jace, he's just been performing well in the mid lane for a while. I think because I play mostly top lane, my understanding of Jace is like, how you'd pilot him as a top laner, and mid lane Jace is a lot more forgiving as a champion, so I think that barrier to entry, where, like, obviously the joke is if you're not a Korean and a top player, you're like really not comfortable on the champion, then you should play Jace top. Obviously that's like, it's not like entirely true, there are some really good Jace players on EU West, but unless you're like GM higher, it's, you really need to be comfortable with champion. This is like the main takeaway of it. You have to understand your limits and how much can you push with the pick, and if you don't, then he ends up just being worse than other options. In mid lane though, it's a bit more forgiving. The lane is shorter, you can just oftentimes get away with maybe not harassing quite as much and just getting to your item spikes and playing a more poke orientated playstyle, and I think that's perfectly reasonable, and that definitely like means he can sit a bit higher on the mid lane tier list. So I am bumping him up to the not the high end of the B tier, like more of the low end of the B tier, just one of those champions where if you invest the time into them, they can be really good as options. And then Yone, the buffs were nice. It's not enough to really swing him all the way up to the A tier. In fact, he probably just sits as like a solid B tier AD option, where if you put the time into him and you're comfortable, he's a relevant option again. I think you can once again like opt into him and find success. And he's been underperforming for a while now. I honestly considered bumping her all the way down to the C tier. She just isn't in the greatest of states. Actually nerfed because of her competitive presence, which is like crazy to think about. And yeah, for average play, she's just not in the greatest of states at the moment, so she does sit within the B tier. Aurora hasn't put out particularly good numbers for average brackets for ever since she got released. And now that like obviously a lot of the people have the mastery on her, it does look to be that she is a pretty innately elite skewed champion. She's good and competitive as well. So I think if you want to put the time into her, she can be incredibly rewarding, but she definitely does underperform in these brackets. You really have to understand how to utilize the kind of full extent of the champion, your resets on your W, how to utilize the ultimate. Obviously it's a very unique ability in the way it functions, and I think that is where a lot of the strength of the champion comes from. Gragas is fine. He's not in the greatest of states. I think Gragas could be buffed, and I think that would be fine. Obviously, when played mid, he's primarily played by like the OTPs who play to be like one-shot orientated builds, which is fine. And I think the champion can be fine when like you're comfortable on it, but outside of that, he's probably just not really worth playing at the moment. Lissandra sits within the B tier. She's a niche counter pick. I think she could also be buffed, and it probably would be fine for the game. Right now, she just kind of sits under the bar. Twitch mid, unique playstyle, and I think he can function quite nicely here. He's not like hidden OP or anything. I'd say he's just a solid option if you've already got the mastery on the champion and you want to flex him towards the mid lane. Then you have the string of assassins. You have the likes of Kiana, who got nerfed in the previous patch and seems to just have like fallen back as a fine AD assassin. Like a lot of these champions in like the kind of mid B tier are, if you put a lot of time into them, they can be really rewarding options. Once again, it's like your Kianas, your Talons, your Katarinas, your LeBlancs, which I'm going to drop down here. Like a lot of these champions where like if you have the mastery and the understanding of your lethal ranges, like how you want to play the map, they are really good picks. But if you don't, then they end up being really bad compared to some of the options, because you need to understand that like as an assassin, like what your target priorities are and what you can really do on the map to kind of like influence it, because you don't have the wave clear and you don't really have the sustained damage that a lot of the other mid laners provide. So it is really like reliant on that kind of burst orientated situations. I think LeBlanc is still my number one. Katarina still seems to be performing quite well though. Like at the moment, obviously she is probably the extreme of the OTPs. Like you have to be an OTP of this champion, otherwise she is just so much worse than the other things around her. And then Akali is my favorite for just like general like the game. I think Akali's a really approachable assassin, and like once you understand the kit, once you like understand the matchups you want to play her into, I think she can be pretty good in that regard. Like I would recommend Akali and LeBlanc to learn over the other 5 like any day of the week. The other 5 I think with investment can be equally or even better than these 2 for the most part. Cho'Gath has been not great in the mid lane for a while now. Like I've been kind of observing his numbers and like seeing how he performs and like what he's been doing on a patch by patch basis, and generally he just seems to be not the same pick he once was. The Q nerfs really hit his like wave clear breakpoints. Symbiotic Souls getting nerfed also really hurt him. Halo Blaze being buffed this patch was nice. I think that does like have some level of benefit, so he will probably maintain his spot within like the mid to high end of the B tier, but he's definitely not performing quite as well, and like Shirelles is a well-known pretty bad item at the moment, so I think that also does kind of have an impact. Ziggs, weirdly enough, just never really performs that well in mid lane. I think his inconsistency and like the fact that I think he has like other champions which are in like the same competitive vein, which I just say are better than him at the moment. Like in a way, the spots where you want to play Ziggs, you can also play like Xerath, Vel'Koz, Hui, Syndra. You've got like options there, and I think unless you're really comfortable with a champion, you're probably not gonna go to Ziggs a lot of the time. In the case of Silas, I think as a counter pick, he's still really good as an option. And Silas is one of those champions which just scales with how volatile the game is. Like, you just want to fight. And a lot of the time, if you can get ahead of the curve, you can take over games. Especially if you have, like, one or two... I mean, it's usually 2 or 3 good ultimates for the most part at the moment, where you can, like, kind of chain utilize them. Galio, really not putting out that great numbers at the moment, which is unfortunate to see. I still like him as an option. He's pretty accessible, has clear matchups where you really want to be playing him. But he definitely suffers broadly into some of the AD options at the moment. And unless you're very comfortable playing like the Protobelt playstyle at the moment, he definitely isn't quite the same champion in his current state. I also think he suffers from Hollow Radiance just not being a particularly good item. It's nice to see that actually in the next patch they are buffing Sunfire, one of the wave clear items. I think for a while now, both of them have been pretty underwhelming. And hopefully they will end up bringing Hollow up to a more... I'd say, I don't know, it's one of those items which, statistically, it's not, like, horrible, but it definitely feels quite bad in some situations to have it when maybe you want something else, and, yeah, I think that's just, like, one of the issues of the item system at the moment, though. Mel is... I mean, I think Mel's probably an S tier champion at the moment. This champ's really strong. It's still the same issue where people are maxing Q over E. Like, I am going to bump her to the bottom of the A tier. I still think she's an incredible option, and I really do recommend learning the champion. She is being adjusted next patch. They are aware that the Emax playstyle isn't being played enough and is pretty unhealthy, like, long term for the champion. So, yeah, they're going to strip some power from that, but I'm going to bump her up to the A tier for the moment. And then the other 2 champions within the B tier are Orianna and Victor. Neither of these champions perform particularly well in solo queue at the moment. I think Victor's become... Victor is noticeably not quite as popular, and people don't have the same kind of, like, view of the champion these days. Orianna's still perceived as being pretty solid, albeit she isn't putting up the greatest numbers. I think these 2 champions do have build variations, which sometimes can tax their win rate. Like, people will play the wrong things in the wrong games, and if you just default on, like, Blackfire, then oftentimes you'd probably just be doing better for it. Obviously, there are games where Roa can be really good into, like, those burst-orientated team comps where you can go, like, a double Ruby early, and it becomes very hard to move you out of lane, but it's definitely, like, a strength of the item. But, yeah, I'll have them towards the top of the B tier still. Aesol, I am bumping up to the A tier. He's probably a high A tier champion now. The buffs are really good for him. Exactly what he wants as a champion. And being able to, like, be a bit less assailable early on to the game. Have a bit more mobility, a bit more damage. Being able to stack up a bit more easier, like, freely. Yeah, it's good for the champion. And I do think Aesol should have been buffed. I don't think Aesol should be a champion which maintains a spot within the A tier. Even the S tier consistently. Like, I think that's just kind of the shape of the champion, because he is quite punishable early on into the game. Zoe sits within the A tier. I think if you're a comfortable champion, she's still an incredible pick. Like, she does so much damage, and if you can get the ball rolling and you understand how to utilize her combos, she is really oppressive in that regard. Vex, I think people have realized, I say people have realized, the OTPs of the champion know that there are like 2 variations of Vex. You can play like the haste variation, or you can play like the more burst orientated variation. The haste traditionally does better in more games. It's just more flexible in what you can do. You can like act as like a backline mage where you can just like cast out a lot of abilities, or you can still go in and look for those dive RW burst angles. She can still be really effective in that regard. Generally though, yeah, I think the champion's a solid A tier option at the moment, and I think people are sleeping on her to an extent. She, as much as you want to play her in her specific matchups, does work more broadly if you are playing her like in her different variations. Fizz is being adjusted next patch. They're going to try and make Fizz jungle work. I don't know how successful that will be. In fact, like, if you want to check it out, like, Riot Foxon just tweeted all the changes, and there are lots of like cool kind of adjustments they're making, like Jace jungle, Riven jungle, Aatrox jungle, Malphite jungle, to name a few. But yeah, Fizz gonna have some adjustments next patch. It'll be interesting to see how those land. For mid though, I think it's like a sharp counter pick. He's really good at the moment, and even generally, I think the champion's pretty solid in his current state. So if you're comfortable with the pick, I'd recommend playing him. I think he's like a tier above the other assassins, because I think there are clear spots where you want to play him, and it can definitely be really rewarding, and he's just quite strong at the moment. Kassadin, generally been left in a pretty solid state. So yeah, I think Cassidy, deserving A tier champion at the moment. Ari is being buffed next patch. Weird to see, considering I don't think Ari's a bad champion. She's like a low A tier option. I don't think she's a high A tier option. And obviously she's one of the most popular champions in the game. So it would make sense to like keep her above the bar by a solid margin. And especially now that the competitive season's over. So Ari, yeah, going to be bumped. I mean, it's going to stay in the A tier for the moment. Probably will get bumped even higher with the buffs in the next patch. I can't imagine they're big though by any means. So just a good Stonewall in the mid lane. I think a lot of the champions which run the second wind D Shield Biscuits combo have lost a sizable amount of sustain. So it's no longer quite as good to just opt into a tank going, I'm going to Stonewall this lane, because it's just not as Stonewallable anymore. You are going to have to concede more resources. That is just by nature of a lot of the things which you run being nerfed. So yeah, the champion's going to be weaker for it. I still think he's a solid option mode. Like if you enjoy playing a champion which can stalemate a lot of lanes and influence the map utilizing your ultimate and just provide frontline for your team, I still think he can be a great option in that regard. Malphite and Garen still remain as like other top laners within the A tier. I actually like grouping these like champions together. Malphite both has the tank and the AP variation, and Malphite with his recent buffs seems to have found good footing again. Obviously in top lane it matters more because you are playing against champions which would have opted into second wind and D shield against you when you're playing like the Arcane Comet setup, and now that that's nerfed, it's just already helped him, combined with the fact that he got buffs towards the tools which like he wants to be buffed. I think Malphite, yeah, really like is a more accessible option again. In the case of Garen, the recent buffs to his E total AD ratio really helped him. Obviously, Phase Rush got nerfed this patch, that is going to affect, yeah, like the Victors, the Orianas, the Garens, there are other champions, which I'm trying to think of off the top of my head. Those are the three core ones, at least, like from what I've already put on the list. Obviously, champions like Vladimir will run it sometimes, like over Eri. I mean, actually runs it quite a bit over Eri, but like, yeah, you get the idea. Garen, yeah, solid AD option, pretty approachable as a champion. I don't think he's one of my premier AD options in the mid lane. I think there are a couple of decent ones at the moment, but he's definitely up there as a solid A tier option. I have him next to the likes of Aurelia. Aurelia is the kind of champion where if you've got the mastery on her, she's still an incredible pick. If you're not comfortable with a champion, then she ends up being pretty bad to like lean into. Like you need to have like basically one-tricked her at certain points to kind of like be comfortable on the angles, because you need to snowball games. If you don't snowball games on Aurelia, then she ends up being a really bad champion. She doesn't translate well at all into the late game, and especially in lower brackets where the games will consistently go long because people will make poor macro decisions, slow the tempo of the game down. But yeah, Aurelia does suffer from that. So I keeping him in the A tier. I think if you're comfortable with a champion, he's also an incredible option. I think all three of these AD picks have different strengths. Yasuo's, Yasuo and Aurelia are more similar in the fact that you want mastery on them. They're relatively early game skewed, but Yasuo traditionally wants like certain pairings to really amplify his value, and then your Garen is like the lower mastery curve of the three. What else we got? Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger and Nico, I traditionally like pair these champions together. They kind of fall into the category of unique mid laners where if you're comfortable with them, they can be pretty solid options. But if you're not really comfortable with the gimmick of the champion, then they end up just being kind of non-factors. Like Nico, you need to understand how to functionally use her W. Like there is so much of her power budget within that ability combined with her early game strengths. I think it is really important to just like fully grasp that. In the case of Heimerdinger, it's about how to utilize your siege and like your turret placements. I think if you can master that, then he's a really effective option as well. But you need to understand like these gimmicks to make these champions work. Swain as a conditional counter pick is good. I like Swain. I think there are spots where he can be really valuable as a champion. There are spots where he can really struggle as an option. So yeah, I think he's deserving A tier pick. The low mastery kind of group is like still your Morganas, your Brands, your Malzahars, your Vegas. Well, I think these champions really do thrive in this elo bracket. They just don't usually convert quite as well into higher brackets. I think there are, obviously, like, Veigar mains, and there are people who make Morgana definitely work, like, higher up you go, because they can be quite good in specific matchups, but their biggest strengths do come from the fact that they scale really well, and the lack of, and just, like, the trivialization of wave clear, in the case of Morgana, Brand, and Malzahar, does enable you to think about other things, rather than just, like, fixate on making sure you're CSing effectively. Lux, I think she's an underrated mid laner, and I say this every patch. Like, I think Lux is one of those champions which will always, to an extent, be underrated. Like, she can definitely be played in more situations than a lot of the people who play her perceive. Her wave clear makes her pretty unassailable in a lot of situations. Her overall burst damage and snowball capability is very good. And that is also the limitation of the champion. She is snowball orientated and she's also immobile. So there are definitely positions where you can be punished for playing this champion. But generally though, I think she's a good champion at the moment. And she fits quite nicely alongside like the other artillery options I have here, being like your Zerefs and your Vel'Kozes, who are also quite good in the current meta. They have, I mean, in the case of Zeref, he's definitely been pushed more towards mid. I think Vel'Koz still works a bit better in support, but is also still a good mid laner. Like, they really punish the champions which don't have the tools to kind of get onto them and, like, deal with their, like, harass and poke potential. So the S tier then, as you may have noticed, I've left a lot of champions here. I've actually stripped a lot of champions out of the A tier to bump them up. That includes the likes of Quinn and the Fury. Both these champions have for a while now been like doing really well statistically. Quinn with the nerfs last patch, I dropped her down, but she still performs really well, so I've like already brought her back up. In the case of the Fury, Voltaic Cycler Sword Rush seems to be like a really popular thing with a lot of the mains of the champion. Eclipse and Yomu still look to be performant first item options. Like, I think Neferi mid, now that people have kind of like learned the mastery curve of it, seems good. Like, I think Neferi mid might even get nerfed down the line if Riot really take a notice of it. But right now, yeah, she's a really good AD mid laner, and I definitely recommend putting time to her if you enjoy the champion. Might not be my premier option. I still think my premier option is Pantheon, but it's very close between the two. I really like Pantheon mid. It does a lot to shut down a lot of the assassins. You can still fight against a lot of the mages because you can opt into like early magic resist. The options between like lethality builds and like more health skewed builds does give you flexibility, and generally mid is the best role for just like ulting to a side and like punishing people on the sides. I think it's really nice for him. Obviously jungle Pantheon also really shines in that regard, but mid is less nerfed. Like, obviously jungle Pantheon has sustained a row of nerfs, and mid still seems to be really performant at the moment. So Pantheon mid, I really like him as an option. Probably my premier recommendation for like an AD pick, but there was like flexibility between you can opt into like all 6 of these champions. I think can work quite nicely. Kayle, I mean, Kale's one of my like top S tier options. I think it's hard to have like a definitive S plus tier because I do think there are issues or just not like weaknesses of each of these champions. And Kayle, it's the sacrifice you're making early on into the game. You are giving up agency early to have more agency late, and she really shines in this bracket of play because the games traditionally go quite late. The average like mid to low elo game is going to go like 1, 2, even 3 minutes longer than like the average high elo game, whether that's because people like FF more consistently, I bet, or the games are just more refined, so you will oftentimes see people close out games rather than like stumble and like mess up. And yeah, Kayle benefits from that, combined with the fact that she's just in a really good state at the moment. I think she is a deserving S tier champion. Kennen, I mean, I did say like previously that I was going to avoid putting some of these niche options in the S tier, but Kennen is still really good. Like, Kennen mid has ever since like Splinter popularized it, been a really, really good champion. Like, it's really showed its worth as a mid laner. The burst, the damage, just for like a lot of the kit is just really good for a mid laner, like the roaming potential and like, yeah, the ranged harass. It's just really nice, and I think he really shines as a mid laner. So yeah, it also doesn't hurt your team composition if you are like, if you want to play with like an AD top laner as well. So yeah, it's nice. I really like it as an option. Anivia and Cassiopeia got overbuffed basically, and I mean, it's interesting to see because Cassio and Anivia traditionally look to be these kind of champions which Riot like categorizes. They can basically stay basic OP, and like people don't really take as much offense. Obviously, people know that Anivia is quite strong and that Cassiopeia is quite strong. They both still play at Worlds, and I think it's nice to have that like variety. Yeah, Anivia still a really good champion. Like, even with Phase Rush being nerfed this patch, you're still going to be playing her in the spots where she really like functions well as an option. And with Cassiopeia in her like specific matchups, so it's like short range champions which don't really have the tools to kind of deal with her DPS. Think the likes of Silas, Rise. There are others, but those are like the two which obviously we saw a lot in competitive. Yeah, performs really well. Echo and Diana are like my 2 AP assassins. Diana really isn't quite performing as well as she had done in previous patches. She's gradually been seem to be dropping. I still think she's a great option. Her early game damage is really oppressive, and she can really like pack a punch, especially if you're ahead of the curve. Echo also benefits from Halo Blades being buffed this patch. Definitely something to note when playing this champion. I think it is probably going to be his main keystone now, and yeah, generally he is probably my number 1 AP assassin. Vladimir is being nerfed next patch. Good to see. I think Vladimir's been kind of hidden OP for a while now. I mean, most people have kind of caught on at this stage, but yeah, Vladimir, even before the sustained nerfs to a lot of champions, he was still performing well. Like the sustained nerfs is like the cherry on top. Like it really like shows just. I mean, it makes a lot of the matchups which Vladimir was stonewalled against, like, I mean, obviously not in mid, but like a top lane example might be like for Sion. It just means he's a bit more assailable, and you can kind of freely CS a bit easier. So yeah, it's just like a mental note when playing this champion. And yeah, generally Vladimir mid is like really strong in his current state, and same for Vladimir top. Like both are doing really well. And then I'm bumping Hui up. He's also being nerfed next patch. Makes sense. I think they overbuffed Hui to try and force him into the Worlds meta. They're probably going to peel back some of that. I don't think he needed the AP ratio buff on his E, for example. So maybe that is what they kind of like rip out. But yeah, he's doing really well at the moment, a deserving S tier champion. And then Syndra, I think Syndra is a really nice S tier option at the moment. The recent buffs she received to kind of push her into Worlds were, I mean, good for the champion. And in solo queue especially, she really shines as an option. It's unfortunate to see that she really didn't pick up in competitive. Obviously there are like some issues with like some of the matchup tables, and she can definitely be punished by the current jungle meta. So that is one of the core reasons. But yeah, Syndra generally, like in solo queue, really good at the moment. And yeah, I bumped a decent chunk of champions up to the S tier, but I do think there are a lot of really solid mid lane options, and generally all the way down to like the B tier, I think there are lots of champions where if you invest a lot of time into them, they can be really rewarding as options. It's just a lot of the S tier. I don't think you quite need the same level of mastery, and they are generally like really good in the current state of the game, whether that's through buffs or just the current shape of the meta. I think that's like a big thing at the moment. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.